I thought this vacation would bring us closer, but instead, it became the breaking point of our marriage. My wife and I had been married for 10 years. Life was good in many ways. We had two beautiful children who were our pride and joy. But over time, something changed between us. Like most parents, we got caught up in the endless cycle of responsibilities. School runs, work deadlines, doctor appointments, and everything else that comes with raising a family. By the time we fell into bed at night, we were too tired to talk, let alone connect on a deeper level. Our days felt like they were repeating themselves. I would wake up early to help get the kids ready for school while my wife handled breakfast. After work, we'd tag team dinner, homework, and bedtime routines. Then we'd sit silently in front of the TV before calling it a night. Weekends weren't much better, packed with errands and kids' activities. Somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, we had lost ourselves. It wasn't always like this. Back when we were dating, my wife and I could spend hours talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. But now, even when we did have free time, it felt like we didn't know what to do with it. Conversations had turned into talks about bills, or who would take the kids to soccer practice. That's when I suggested the vacation. A break from the routine sounded like exactly what we needed. No kids, no work, just the two of us reconnecting like we used to. I pictured long walks on the beach, candlelit dinners, and lazy mornings where we could finally talk without interruptions. I believed this trip could help us remember why we fell in love in the first place. She agreed without hesitation. Maybe she felt the distance too, or maybe she was just ready for a change of scenery. Whatever the reason, we booked a tropical getaway, a chance to reset our relationship. I was hopeful, even excited, that this trip could bring us closer. We arrived at the resort early in the morning. The warm sun, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and the laughter of carefree tourists filled the air. The beach was breathtaking, with white sand stretching for miles and crystal-clear water glimmering under the sunlight. For a moment, it felt like the perfect escape. Our first day was filled with small joys. We walked hand in hand along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over our feet. She chuckled softly when a small crab scuttled past her toes, and I couldn't help but grin. It was the first time in weeks I'd heard her laugh like that. During dinner, we shared a meal at a table overlooking the ocean. The sunset painted the sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink, and we talked about how much we needed this break. It felt refreshing, like we were beginning to reconnect. But even amidst the laughter and smiles, I noticed the cracks. She spent more time on her phone than I liked, scrolling through social media or texting friends. When I asked her to join me for a sunrise walk the next morning, she shrugged it off, saying she needed to catch up on sleep. It wasn't a big deal, but it stung. In those quiet moments, when we weren't distracted by the beauty surrounding us, the distance between us became more noticeable. I caught her gazing off into the horizon more than once, her expression thoughtful, almost wistful. When I asked her what was on her mind, she brushed it off with a vague, nothing important. I didn't press her, but deep down, I wondered if she was as invested in this trip as I was. Still, I clung to hope. After all, we were here to mend what felt broken, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. I told myself that these small moments of disconnection didn't mean anything, that they were merely a result of the busy lives we'd been leading. I believed this vacation would help us rediscover each other. But sometimes, when you ignore the cracks, they only grow wider. I was about to learn that no amount of sunsets or sandy beaches could fix what was already slipping away. One evening, the beach was alive with energy, a perfect blend of chaos and joy. The sun had dipped low into the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the rolling ocean waves. The air was filled with a vibrant symphony of sounds, the rhythmic beats of Afro-Caribbean music booming from nearby speakers, the crashing of waves against the shore, and bursts of laughter from the crowd gathered for the night's festivities. Vendors weaved through the bustling throng, calling out offers for cold drinks and snacks. Their colorful carts added even more flair to the lively scene. At the center of all the activity was a large, makeshift stage set up nearby. The water shimmered under the glow of tiki torches, their flames flickering in the warm evening breeze. A lively announcer, microphone in hand, energized the crowd, calling for participants to join the much-anticipated dance competition. A semicircle of spectators clapped, cheered, and whistled as volunteers stepped forward, eager to show off their moves. Amidst the crowd stood my wife, her face glowing with the same excitement that had captivated me years ago. She'd always loved dancing, and tonight was no exception. She leaned toward me, her eyes sparkling with joy. "I want to do it," she said, her voice almost childlike, as if seeking permission. Before I could respond, she was already slipping off her sandals and stepping toward the stage. I didn't think much of it at first. She loved these moments, being in the spotlight, soaking in the crowd's energy. It was simply her nature. I stayed back, settling into my seat with a drink in hand, watching her weave through the crowd with an eager smile. The announcer welcomed her enthusiastically, handing her a numbered sash to tie around her waist. The crowd erupted into cheers as she climbed onto the stage. I found myself chuckling softly. This was so like her. She could never sit still when there was a chance to embrace fun and excitement. Part of me admired her boldness, her ability to dive into the moment without hesitation. Another part of me, the quieter, more reserved side, preferred to watch from afar. I didn't mind. I was happy to let her enjoy herself, while I stayed in the background. My wife's face lit up with enthusiasm when the announcer called for participants in the local dance competition. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just another fun activity, a small part of the vacation we'd planned to reconnect and escape the stresses of life. Then he appeared. Her dance partner was a young, charismatic local with a confident stride and an easy smile that could charm anyone. His sun-kissed skin and athletic build hinted at countless hours spent in the ocean or playing sports. His movements were smooth and assured, as though he owned the dance floor before the music even began. He introduced himself with a courteous bow that made my wife giggle. She offered him her hand, and from that moment, it was as if I had disappeared. They started dancing, and I watched as he twirled her effortlessly, making her laugh and blush. She seemed so carefree, so alive. For a moment, I thought perhaps this was good for her. She deserved to have fun. But as the dance went on, a knot began to form in my stomach. The way he held her waist, the way she leaned into him, it felt like too much. I stood on the sidelines, clapping awkwardly with the rest of the crowd, but I felt entirely out of place. The cheerful music seemed to mock me, its upbeat rhythm contrasting sharply with the turmoil building inside me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every laugh, every lingering touch, felt like a dagger to my heart. Was this really just about the dance? Or was it about everything we'd been avoiding in our marriage? The growing distance, the unspoken silence, the way we had drifted apart? She often sought validation from others instead of turning to me. The applause was deafening when the music ended, but all I could feel was anger. As they bowed and exchanged smiles, I knew I had to say something. I walked up to her, doing my best to keep my voice calm, and said, "Can we talk for a minute?" She frowned but followed me a few steps away from the crowd. I could feel the heat of my frustration rising, threatening to spill over. "What are you doing out there?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This doesn't feel right. I think you should stop." Her expression shifted from confusion to defiance. "What's the big deal?" she snapped. "It's just a dance. We're on vacation. Can't I have a little fun?" I tried to explain how it made me feel, how seeing her dance with him was hurting me, but she didn't seem to care. Her tone grew sharper. "We're married, but you don't own me," she said. "You're not going to tell me what to do." Her words struck me like a slap. I wasn't trying to control her. I only wanted her to understand how much this was affecting me. But in that moment, I realized she didn't care how I felt. This wasn't just about the dance. It was about the growing disconnect between us, about how little she seemed to value the bond we once shared. Swallowing my pride, I gave her one last warning. If you go back out there and dance with him again, you won't find me here when you come back, I said, my voice low but firm. She laughed, as if I just told a joke, then turned without a word and walked back to him. The music started again, and I stood there for a few moments, watching as she smiled and continued to dance, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. As I stood on the edge of the beach, watching her spin and laugh with a man we barely knew, a painful realization struck me. Our marriage had been broken for years. While she danced, I stood frozen, replaying all the moments I had ignored the signs. The quiet dinners where we barely spoke, the nights spent scrolling on our phones instead of talking, the times she seemed distracted. I had convinced myself it was just stress or exhaustion, but that dance wasn't just a dance. It was a final straw, a painful reminder that we had been drifting apart for far too long. I turned and walked back to the hotel. I didn't storm off. I didn't call out to her. What was the point? She didn't even notice I was gone. When I reached our room, the emptiness hit me hard. It was the kind of silence that made you feel lonelier than ever. I started packing my things, my hands moving as if on autopilot. I didn't have a plan, no destination, no idea what I'd do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't bear to watch her prioritize a fleeting moment with a stranger over the man she had once promised to love forever. I booked a taxi to the airport, my fingers trembling as I confirmed the ride. Sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase I had just zipped up, it hit me. I was leaving behind more than just this trip. I was leaving behind the dreams I had for us, the life we had built together, and the woman I once believed was my forever. But in that moment, I knew I deserved more. Not perfection, not some fairy tale, but someone who chose me, who truly saw me. As I stepped into the taxi and told the driver to head to the airport, I felt the weight of everything I was leaving behind. Yet, for the first time in a long time, I also felt a sense of clarity. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to find yourself again. When I arrived home from the trip, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever before. It wasn't the kind of quiet that follows a long day or when the kids are off at school. It was the silence of absence. Something missing. Her presence, her laughter, even the faint sound of her favorite music playing in the background. It was all gone. As I sat down on the couch, my eyes rested on the empty spot where she would usually curl up with a book or her phone. The memories came flooding in. I thought about how we met, how her smile used to light up every room, and how we used to talk for hours about our dreams. Back then, it felt like we were invincible, like nothing could ever come between us. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being us. Life got busy, work, kids, bills. Conversations turned into quick exchanges about schedules and groceries. The connection we once cherished had been buried under years of routine and neglect. I couldn't stop replaying that moment on the beach when she laughed at me, her face full of defiance. "You don't own me," she'd said. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't felt free in our marriage for a long time, and I hadn't even noticed. Maybe I'd been holding on too tightly, trying to control things when all she really wanted was to breathe. But her words weren't the only thing that stung. It was the way she chose to walk away. Right back to the dance floor, to a stranger who could make her laugh in ways I hadn't in years. That image burned itself into my mind. It was then that I realized I'd been clinging to an idea of our marriage that no longer existed. The truth was, we had been broken for a long time, pretending everything was fine when, deep down, we both knew it wasn't. I thought about the good times, the vacations, the birthdays, the nights we stayed up talking about nothing and everything. I wanted so badly to hold on to those memories, but they felt like sand slipping through my fingers. The good memories couldn't outweigh the cracks that had grown between us. Love alone wasn't enough to fix what had fallen apart. Sitting there in the quiet of our home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course, for the life we had built together that was now crumbling. But there was also relief. Relief that I no longer had to fight for something neither of us could save. It wasn't bitterness or anger. It was acceptance. A bittersweet understanding that sometimes, no matter how much history two people share, they can still drift too far apart to find their way back. I didn't know what the future held for me, but one thing was certain. I couldn't keep living in a marriage that felt more like a battle than a partnership. Leaving her on that beach wasn't just about the dance. It was about reclaiming my own sense of worth, my own happiness. And while the pain of letting go was real, so was the hope that maybe this was the start of something better for both of us. After that vacation, my wife's life took a different turn. At first, she didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of what had happened. When she returned home from the trip, she was greeted by the emptiness of our house. A house we had once built together as a symbol of our partnership. My things were gone, the rooms felt colder, and the silence echoed louder than any words I could have spoken. She called me a few times during the first week, her voice filled with a mix of confusion and irritation. She didn't seem to understand why I had left, why I couldn't just come back and move on as if nothing had happened. I tried to explain, to make her see that the problem wasn't just about the dance or her partner. It was about years of feeling invisible, about her seeking validation from everyone but me, and about her refusal to acknowledge the cracks in our foundation. Over time, her calls became less frequent. Perhaps she was starting to accept that our relationship had truly ended. She stopped asking me to come back and began focusing on her own life instead. At that point, all that truly mattered to me were the kids. That dance on the beach may have been the final straw, but in truth, our marriage had ended long before she twirled into his arms.